major sports franchises, which are, first of all, exempted from the laws of economic competition.
A monopoly.
That's right. Irony is not dead. They derive, I show in Free Lunch, 100% of their profits from subsidies. In fact, if it weren't for these subsidies, the baseball, football, hockey, and basketball enterprises as a whole would be losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
And the irony, as you say, is that at least 27 billionaires own major sports teams, all of which benefit from public subsidies.
In one way or another, some much more than others, but they all benefit.
You remember what Art Modell said back in 1996 when he was manipulating Baltimore and Cleveland into a bidding war for his football team? He was asked how he felt about taking money for his own pocket. At the very same time, library funds were being cut. Remember what he said?
Oh, yes. The pride of having a professional baseball team is worth more than 30 libraries.
George W. Bush.
Well, this is a great irony. George Bush owes almost his entire fortune to a tax increase that was funneled into his pocket and into the use of eminent domain laws to essentially legally cheat other people out of their land for less than it was worth to enrich him and his fellow investors.
By building this stadium in Arlington, Texas for the baseball
Texas
team.
Rangers.
Texas Rangers,
right.
That's right.
And one of the key sources I quote is a prominent Republican lawyer married to a United States senator who is the expert in Texas on municipal finance. The subsidy, he says, is $202.5 million. And Bush and his partners captured about $168 million of it.
Bush, you say, used eminent domain to claim the land on which the stadium was built, right? And Bush advised his investors, his co-investors, this is a sweet deal.
Oh, yeah. He said that, here's this money-losing team. It's got this little stadium. It can't make money. But if we can get a stadium built, it'll be worth a lot of money. And that's going on all over the country. All you have to do is get the stadium built, and you'll be rich.
One of your most revealing stories in here, for me, is about the small merchant of fishing and outdoor gear who's put out of business by a big competitor who gets $32 million in subsidy from government.
If you walk into many of the big box retailers today, you have to pay sales tax at the cash register on whatever you buy. Well, in many of those stores, the government never gets the money. The owners of the stores get to keep it. And who are the big beneficiaries of that? The Walton family that owns Walmart, and the Cabela family, who own Cabela's, which is a fin, feather, and fur outfitting club for fishermen and hunters. And in this little town in the Poconos, 4,100 people, they came and said, we want to build the world's largest outdoor store, $32 million. And the local town fathers went for it because they said all these jobs it'll create and all this economic benefit. And Jim Weeknecht, who runs this little tiny store that makes enough money that his wife can stay home and raise their children, he's outraged. He goes, nobody gave me a subsidy. If I'd gone to City Hall and said, give me $1 million, they would have laughed at me. And, he charged lower prices than Cabela's. They still ran him out of business. This little town gave the Cabela family the equivalent of about 11 years of the entire city budget.
Wow.
For police and fixing the streets and everything else. And this is going on all across America.
Yeah, but Cabela promised jobs and more money flowing through the economy, but that hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't happened. And in fact, that's the argument made everywhere. What you're really doing is using this government subsidy to draw business away from the existing local merchants who are effectively being taxed to subsidize the newcomer.
You have a chapter in here about an economics professor who embraced the idea of getting government out of the way of business. And yet then he turned around and made cultivating government his business, quote, leaving behind a trail of death and costs that were shifted onto the taxpayers. And he went on to become our government's Treasury Secretary.
John Snow was a brilliant young economics professor and lawyer who wrote about how the government system of regulating transportation was inefficient and causing difficult costs, and in the Ford administration had a prominent role in promoting deregulation of trucking. Then he got a job with the CSX, what's now the CSX Railroad.
And what is CSX?
It's one of the largest railroad companies in America. And Snow, throughout his career, spent an enormous amount of time going and meeting, not with presidents of the United States, but with the congressmen and senators and the staff members and the bureaucrats you're never going to hear about in the Transportation Department and the Appropriation Department to get all the rules and favors that he wanted. And one of the worst rules is this: if you're on an Amtrak train and there is an accident and something happens to you, the damages that occur are always paid by the taxpayers, even if, as in the case I tell about in the book, there was a known unsafe condition that CSX caused in its zeal to cut costs and to increase Mr. Snow's salary. Even though Snow was warned and warned, this is dangerous, we're not doing enough for safety, there were official investigations, they stuck to their policy. They saved $2.4 billion. Well, people died because of it. One widow pressed her case, got all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court with it, got $50 million in damages awarded by a jury. Couldn't today because Governor Jeb Bush in Florida signed a law to prevent this from happening again. But got $50 million in damages. Didn't cost CSX a penny. They just handed the bill to the taxpayers and said, you get to pay.
Because this is a law.
That's the law.
Passed by Congress.
That's right. And this is a moral hazard. It's another thing that Adam Smith warned us about. You shouldn't be able to say, I get the rewards and you, the taxpayer, are going to pick up all the risks.
Are you agreeing with Ronald Reagan that government is not the solution, government is the problem?
Well, there are lots of problems with government. I mean, I've spent my life exposing all sorts of problems with government. But government is fundamentally essential. Government is what creates for us civilization. We created this country so that we could be free, so that we could pursue our lives the way that we want to pursue them. And wealth is a byproduct of that. But the government is being turned into a vehicle not to ensure our liberties and create a level playing field, but instead into a vehicle to take from the many to enrich the few.
There was a stunning section in your book where you say these new rules that have come about in the last few years help Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers, MBNA, that's the big bank holding company, and Citibank exploit the poor, the unsophisticated, and the foolish, because these lenders can now charge rates and impose penalties that were illegal, even criminal, a generation ago.
You know, we used to put people to death 500 years ago for loaning money for interest. And for a long time, the government regulated the kind of interest that you could charge. And then we had a Supreme Court decision in 1978. And the Supreme Court in that said, you know, because the way the law is written, we're basically undoing the usury laws in this country. And Congress, pay attention. You need to do something to address this. Well, Congress did. It discovered it was a fabulous way to milk banks and related companies for campaign contributions. And they did for years and years and years and years. Now you turn on your television, and there's Gary Coleman, the former child star,
right,
promoting a loan where they'll put the money right into your bank account over the telephone, calling in on the telephone, at 99.25% interest.
America today is more than twice as wealthy as it was in 1980. And the economy is putting out 2/3 more per person. I mean, you even remind us that more than half of the wealth created in this country since the United States began has been created in the past quarter century. What's to complain about that?
Well, that's tremendous economic growth. The problem is where it's going. The increases in income and wealth are all taking place at the very top. In 2005, the richest 1% increased their income by far more than the total income of the bottom 20%. My contention is that it is government policy that is causing this to happen, that in all sorts of different ways. There was a time when government policy was to create and nurture and build a middle class. We had a GI Bill, we built an interstate highway system, we invested in education and hospitals. Now we have a government whose policy is to enrich the already rich and make them richer. That's its focus. And I believe that if we continue down that road, you create instability and you don't create as much wealth.
You point out, by the way, that that Bill Clinton, as president, gave the super rich a larger tax break than George Bush's tax cuts, right?
Yeah, I love to trot this one out when somebody goes, "Oh, you're from the New York Times, you must be, you know, pro-Democrat or liberal or whatever." I'm the guy who broke the story and reported on the fact that Bill Clinton gave the super rich, the 400 highest income people in America, a big tax cut. They were paying 30 cents out of each dollar of their income to the federal government when he came into office. When he left, it was down to 22. Bush has lowered it to 17. Now, first of all, notice you're probably paying more than 17 cents. May well be paying more than 22. But Bush gave him an 8-cent tax cut. I'm sorry, Clinton gave him an 8-cent tax cut, and Bush only gave them 5 cents.